Game 1 of preseason is in the books for the Winnipeg Jets, and while Winnipeg did fall 3-2 in overtime to the Wild, a lot of the young kids really stood tall for Winnipeg. Find out who shone the brightest on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, Game 1 of Winnipeg preseason hockey is in the books after last weekend's prospect showdown in Montreal, where the Jets were perfect. Winnipeg decided to kind of follow it up with a first preseason game against Minnesota that you'd argue was pretty young. We really didn't see many, if at really any of the NHL regulars for the Jets, except on the blue line. The blue line had three guys who usually rotated for the third pairing for Winnipeg, but up front, this was the kid show. And, looking at this game, what happened, and yes, I'll spoil it, the Jets lost in overtime. Don't worry about it. I think that there was a lot to really be excited about, but I think what stood out about a lot of this game was, the Jets were really stingy, right? For most of the game until the third period, Winnipeg really didn't give the Wild much of anything. Minnesota, for their part, mostly had, I would call, a pretty depth group. You'd be forgiven for thinking if it was the Moose versus Iowa. It kind of looks like that sort of roster. I will say that the Wild did bring a few extra NHLers. Vinny Hinostroza has kind of been a tweener. I think Danila Yurov and Yakov Trenin are probably going to be fighting for spots. Maybe Brett Leeson at some point. You had Tyler Pitlick as well, who's been, an NHLer at some point. But I would say for the most part, outside of like maybe Albay, Kubel, and a few others, this is kind of like that AHL top six sort of vibe. So this group against Minnesota, I thought would have an interesting time, right? After the prospect showdown, here you have more adult sort of players. How will the Baby Jets do? And for the most part, I thought pretty decently. You had, four lines with Philip DiGiuseppe on the first, with Yeager and Lambert, then Koepka, Barron, and Dewar on the second. The third line was Gus, Anderson, Dolan, and Chibrikov, and then on the fourth, Zhilkin, and Fagemo. So, that's a pretty solid top nine and a really good fourth line that had a lot of energy. In terms of time on ice deployments, I didn't quite look at it that closely. I don't usually pay attention as much until you start getting more into the actual meat of preseason when you're looking at your starting lineups. But I will say that, immediately, this lineup for the most part was pretty energetic. And Cole Koepka, I think, is going to be a guy that a lot of folks will enjoy. He's a fourth line player that's actually got a level of hesitance and intelligence to his game that you don't tend to find out of a lot of bottom sixers, right? He's kind of like Tanev, but with hands and maybe patience. That might be the better way to describe him. He's fast. He can win wall battles and forecheck effectively. But when he's got the puck on his stick, he actually does try to make things happen. I'd probably compare him maybe to like when the Jets signed Kevin Stenlund. I think that's probably the closest thing. So don't be shocked if he actually wins a lineup spot out of camp in preseason. He might be on the fast track towards a fourth line role, which, given that the Jets are going to be down Lowry, there's already going to be a potential availability. Pearson will probably get another spot. Gus Nyquist, of course, should slide in for Ehlers is my guess. So I wouldn't be surprised if Koepka maybe goes in place of like a Gustafsson or something. Gustafsson, I thought, had a pretty strong game himself. You had some nice performances from a lot of the returning guests. Morgan Barron getting himself a bit of a greasy goal, and just the kind of stuff that you really like to see. You'll notice that I've also sort of highlighted a section for Danny Dimes and the lads. I want to talk about some of our top performers a little bit later, including Elias Salomonsson, because, it's probably time for you to be on the hype train for Salmon Man if you aren't already. I've been a big proponent of his for a while, but I think this game just shows at this point he probably does need some NHL time. He is mature beyond his years, and I'll chat a little bit later about what has made him so special and why he stands out from this pack of, frankly, pretty solid NHL defenders here in this group, right? This is a pretty borderline third pairing to maybe second pairing group, you might argue, with Miller being probably the best of the bunch and Salomonsson around there. But yeah, overall, a fun game, right? You had a crowd of about 14,500, which by Winnipeg standards is really impressive for a preseason game. You don't often see many folks coming out for stuff like this, especially like a preseason game, right? There's no marquee names that I think people would be flocking to see ordinarily. But if this is a preview of what you might expect from the Moose this year, I think fans should really be filling the stands for those games. Go to see Manitoba. I think the Moose are going to be a ton of fun. This roster is probably pretty darn close to what you can expect. You'll have maybe a change with the goalies, and at least one of these guys will be up with a big club, of course. Up front, probably Koepka, and obviously outside of Barron. Barron's a lock, but maybe Koepka, maybe Gustafsson for the 13th. There's going to be some interesting battles here in camp as we continue to go through preseason and see more and more performances. If there was anything that you maybe not love, I guess, perhaps the blue line not exactly being the best at moving the puck, I think did stand out. More so with a couple of guys. Bauer, I think, had a tough night. Stanley, it's Logan, right? You sort of know what you're getting with him. He unfortunately got beat on a PK that probably, you'd like, I think it was either Millicher, I forget if it was Miller or Millicher Poulter in net at this point. Might have been Poulter. You might have liked that angle to be cut down. Hunter Haight actually scored a bit of a snipe, but I mean, it is what it is. It's preseason. You don't really care too much. But I think the bigger thing is that, Stanley ended up getting pulled into the center channel and allowed Haight to kind of get the outside step. Not necessarily what you want to do on the PK, right? But that's pretty normal. So nothing super shocking in that respect. I think otherwise, the Jets were stingy, didn't give too much up, and it sort of looks a lot like how I think Arneal's going to coach this year, which Winnipeg is going to have to battle for everything, right? Winnipeg's offense, I think, during the regular season will be solid. I think they'll do enough to win games. I think defensively, they're not going to really give opponents a lot to look at, which is good, right? That's always what you want to see. But, the upper end of the skill peak, I guess, might be a little bit limited. So just bear that in mind as we start getting closer to the playoffs. If the Jets are in a good playoff spot, I would not expect that this group for, the actual lineup once we get into the regular season is going to have the deepest of runs. So really, I'm looking at a lot of these kids and wondering, who's going to have a big year for the Moose this season? Who could step up and be the internal upgrade that the Jets are looking at come trade deadline when Winnipeg is trying to figure out how do we take this next step and actually raise the playoff ceiling of this team? Because if you get maybe two of these guys who have a really strong Moose season and they actually do well enough to earn call-ups and they do well at the NHL level, maybe, just maybe, you could cut down the number of trades you would need to make in order to improve this team at the TDO. If you really want to raise the ceiling of this playoff squad, maybe, it's going to start internally. Now, I know how the Jets are. I know that this is probably a little bit more of a pipe dream, but I hope that, one of Lambert, Yeager, or some of these other guys does enough to really prove that they deserve a call-up, that they do well and thrive in the NHL, and that they help Winnipeg actually have a deeper playoff run. As it is, I think Winnipeg's playoff ceiling is still modest, so this is where I think the Moose really have a chance to be a great proving grounds, and I hope that this year's Moose season is successful, that they go deep, and that they can help develop some really young talent into something special for the Jets, because Winnipeg, they're on the older side. We are looking at probably the closing hours of this Jets core. It is time for the youth to step up. But curious to know how you felt about this game. Did you have fun? Were you there? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now it's time to dive into some individual performances and spotlight some very key top players in this game that you're going to want to keep an eye on. Some are not going to be surprising. Some you will want to perhaps add in your fantasy teams if you've got a dynasty keeper league. But we'll chat about that coming up right in a little bit. Before then, though, did want to shout out our friends and partners at Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts, or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. If you don't have the full picture, you could be leaving tons of money on the table. Monarch Money is here to help. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives and does all of the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. If you have a partner or spouse, you can have a shared account so that you're not only setting shared financial goals and staying on the same page, but you can also track all of your spending and investments together. It's a great way to ensure that you're always on the same page, and it can help you figure out and map out your financial future. If you are somebody who likes to check into trends, how your investments are performing, this is a great platform to follow along as perhaps your investments take flight, or maybe something's struggling and you need to address it. Monarch Money is here to help week in and week out and for the long term. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are continuing our chat about game one of preseason for the Jets. Very youth-heavy lineup. I thought it was a fun game. Winnipeg was generally pretty stingy, just couldn't quite close it out, unfortunately, and fell a little bit short. But now I want to talk about the fun stuff, right? Who really stood out in this game? And of course, I've already said I'm going to dedicate a bit of time to Elias Salomonsson and talk a little bit about him. So, don't get too worked up about me not talking about Elias just yet. I want to talk about the forwards first, because I think this group had a couple of really interesting standouts. And the first is Danny Zhilkin, man. Danny Dimes is back. After two big prospect showdown games, he got, some real work into Group 1 at training camp, which, it doesn't mean that he's going to be called up or anything, but I think it's a really big deal to see him continue to get time, to really get a level of comfort, and to look, quite frankly, like he's reborn. He was active, he was aggressive, he was winning forechecks and board battles. I thought he was very fast, and for all of his efforts, he had a great central drive down the slot that Kevin He ended up finding him coming down that I guess Broadway, if you want to say, Golden Road area for a great pass, great feed off of a counter, and Zhilkin delivered a fantastic goal. Exactly what you want to see from Danny, and I think the sort of performance that continues to show that, he's really willing to make a statement this year, and he wants to be seen as a key aspect of this upcoming Jets prospect pool, especially to maybe fight for a middle six or depth role for the Jets. Zhilkin, for the past couple of years, hasn't really had the most success. Injuries and some stuff, probably with adapting to the pro leagues and the Moose being not the best team out there, I think has really held him back a bit. But coming into camp, he looks like a player who's been reborn. The past 3 games for him have been excellent. He looks like he's, quite frankly, ready to fly with the Moose. And you'd have to think that based on what you're seeing so far, that he's likely to have a big Manitoba season. And if the Moose can turn him into a real top 6 option with the AHL squad, maybe you can start to rethink what he does at the NHL level. Maybe there's more to him that could actually translate into a really successful middle 6 role. I've always been an appreciator of his work ethic and engine, because that part was always there. He also had a pretty good shot, and smart offensive instincts. And so you could see that there's stuff to his game that certainly looks projectable, but actually delivering, it's been, again, a bit of a mixed bag the past couple of years. So great to see him really start to thrive. He's clicking, and it just seems like as these games continue to move on, keep an eye out for him to maybe start getting more and more responsibility. Also, I think it's also worth talking about Fagemo. Fagemo is obviously a new guy here to the Jets coming out of LA's system. He looks like he's going to be a really solid addition for Manitoba. I thought that, he played a really good complementary position on both the power play and at even strength, notched a couple of assists, and was just generally facilitating play at a very solid clip. Not super shocking considering Sam at the lower levels has been really dominant, and it's why he was brought in to be a top 6 option for the Moose. I'm excited for him. I think he's going to have a big year, and I would expect that, he's going to be one of the biggest reasons why Manitoba might have one of the better offenses in the entire AHL. Now comes the extra fun guys. These are the ones you are begging to know about. How did the kids do, especially some of the more, fan hyped prospects like Chibrikov, Lambert, and Jaeger? So for Jaeger, I thought he actually had probably one of the quieter nights. Not bad, but he does seem like he's taking a little bit to get up to speed at the quote end quote pro level, and I think it'll take him some time to adapt. I would expect his Moose season to be in the modest range, maybe 25, 30 points as a rookie, which could be very good. But I think he's showing that, he's going to take a little bit of time. So just be patient. His defensive acumen and two-way play are all there. So it's just really getting up to pro speed, kind of, getting his timing down, all that stuff. I think that'll just come with continued reps and practice. So, be patient with him, but I think he's going to be a very good player in the future. Lambert, I thought, had a pretty fun night. The only thing that really sucked for him was that he actually drew a penalty late in overtime and ended up driving his knee into the post as he was coming in. I thought it was going to be a penalty shot, like a denial of a scoring opportunity, but they did not award that. So, he ended up having to come off the ice later during the power play. They iced his knee. Apparently, it was actually a concussion spotter from New York that pulled him. So I guess his knee's okay. Not really sure. But, otherwise, I think some folks were suggesting that maybe he had a tougher night. Maybe he wasn't that active or noticeable. And I think with him, it was just more like the line fit wasn't great. Jaeger and DiGiuseppe don't quite match the sorts of speed that I think Lambert brings. And so Brad would kind of be the first guy in the zone looking for somebody to pass to. And oftentimes he got swarmed immediately because maybe his teammates weren't really in the best position as an outlet. So I think once you get him with some skill, you'll start to see why I continue to be pretty high on him. Chibrikov looked a lot more at the races tonight. I thought that his forechecking was effective. He had a couple of shots that I thought were sneaky and smart. Almost caught Wallstedt and, looking for, maybe a greasy little one. Wallstedt at the end of a period maybe almost let one through. He had a nice one-timer again on the power play. So just generally a pretty solid night for Chibrikov. He was also throwing the body around a lot, which is good to see. He's a strong forechecker, constantly trying to do stuff along the boards. That's the kind of game that I think is really going to get him noticed. One of our MVPs of the night, though, Kevin He. He had an okay prospect showcase, but I think tonight was probably one of his best performances that I've seen him put together for the Jets so far. And again, look, he's only been in scrimmages and practice, so don't expect this to be like the defining performance ever, but I think you saw exactly why so many of us are high on him. He was relentless. He was aggressive. He was constantly forcing turnovers, getting right in front of the puck carriers. And I think his best play tonight really came on a neutral zone counter where he was one of the outlets for transition, and he got a basp that was like fairly well behind him. Somehow managed to corral it from behind his back, and then set up a great odd man situation where Zhilkin had the inside cut, find Zhilkin for a great goal, and you just couldn't orchestrate a better night for Kevin. Also really impetuous along the wings, constantly getting in guys' faces, like I said, being a real nuisance, and just has that relentless motor and ethic to keep creating chaos, to keep looking for offensive opportunities. And honestly, he was this close to getting a goal. There was a turnover from Minnesota right in front of Wallstedt, and he was like inches away from capitalizing. Unfortunately, just shot it wide. But if you were looking for all of the reasons why Kevin is a fairly well-regarded prospect, I think this is exactly the sort of game that you want to see from him. Will he have the ceiling of like a top 6 guy? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. The way that he scores a lot of his goals at the junior levels is not necessarily stuff that translates at the pro levels. And so what I thought he demonstrated tonight was that he has continued to grow his game, that he's ready to take that next step. And I think a lot of us should be very excited about what he can do in Winnipeg's middle six. We already know that he's a natural-born leader. The way that he carries himself and the way that he talks about his teammates in the game, it's, well beyond his years. I had a lovely time talking to him last year. I'll probably try and interview him this year as well. Maybe ask him a little bit about the prospect showcase and what he's felt the past few months as he continues to inch closer and closer to pro duty. This is going to be his last year with Niagara, so get ready for him to join the Moose and potentially be a Jet in the very near future. Winnipeg obviously was high on him from the start. They've already given him his ELC, so they clearly believe that he has some real gas in the tank to be a good NHLer. And I just continue to see him work hard. I think he's going to be a fun player. And in tonight's preseason game, he was easily one of Winnipeg's standouts. There is one more standout, though, that I think really deserves a huge shout out, one that you already know that I love because I've raved about him before. It's time to talk about Elias Salomonsson. The NFL season is finally here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Monday Night Football is later this evening, Ravens versus Lions, and if you think you know who's going to win this one, this is your time to get in on the action. Just $5, and if you win, you get $300 in bonus bets. Whether you want to put down some player props and odds or try to decide who's going to win the game, or maybe who even wins next weekend's matchups of crazy NFL action. It's been a wild start to the season. Well, this is your time to get in on the fun. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's episode as we are just wrapping up with some thoughts on one of tonight's MVPs. It is Elias Salomonsson. Now, Salomonsson, I've always been pretty high on since the start, and I think the Jets are starting to really view him the same way. He was given prime PP1 time tonight, including a contribution on the first Jets goal from Morgan Barron. Salomonsson had an assist. And, the first thing that's going to stand out about Elias is just the intelligence, right? He really just doesn't make many mistakes. And when he does, he's quick to recover. He's quick to backtrack and make sure that he's in good positions. And he assesses where his line mates are, makes smart spatial gap decisions to try and make sure that he doesn't give up passing or shooting lanes. He even had a block that at first glance looked like maybe it was a goal-saving block. I think Poulter might have gotten to the shot anyways, but the fact that Salomonsson recognized the threat immediately, got to a knee, and made sure that it just didn't have any space to shoot on the near post. Again, the dude's bought in. Earlier in the prospect showdown, he dropped the gloves after Chibrikov got railed from behind, and Salomonsson immediately showed no fear. He's not the biggest guy, but he dropped the gloves anyways. He didn't win the fight, mind you, but I think he just has a maturity and an intensity to his game beyond his years. Now, where I really have a lot of excitement for Elias is his puck-moving ability, right? The two-way acumen, the breakout passes, the vision, the intelligence, the patience, all this stuff, to me, tells me that Salomonsson might be ready for NHL duty. I think at this point, he's kind of at a stage of his development that was similar to where Heinola was a few years ago, where at the AHL level, I don't know how much more he can benefit from that. Salomonsson just seems to be one of those special prospects that's processing the game at a higher level than a lot of his peers. And because of that, it's probably better for him to start getting NHL time where he can figure out the timing, get used to the reps, understand timing and space at a much more aggressive, more pressurized environment, and one where space is at a premium. And the NHL is the only place that he's going to really get that. That said, he's probably not going to play more than a game or two this season. And I think that's where, this logjam of the Jets' blue line is a little bit, frustrating, right? Salomonsson may not be 100% ready for full-time NHL duty, but, the only way that you're really going to know where he is at this stage is to put him against some of the league's best. See how he processes things, see where he's at, and if he really does struggle for a stretch, you always have the option to return him to Manitoba. But I think he's the kind of kid who really rises up to the challenge, who adapts. And, his first full year in North America, he immediately looked very comfortable. His offense really took off, and he had a big year with the Moose. I expect him to have another massive year with the Moose. And I hope that he does get a call up at some point. I think the Jets view him as the player that's going to supplant Dylan DeMello. Very tall order, mind you. This is not exactly something that's going to be uh, a small task for anyone, let alone Salomonsson, who's going to have to play with Josh Morrissey, one of the best defenders in the league. But I think that tells you the projection and where the Jets see his future. It's not just me saying this. Kevin Sawyer straight up mentioned that during tonight's broadcast. And like he tried to correct himself and maybe walk it back a little bit, not saying that DeMello is about to get dumped, but Dylan's at the stage of his career where he's older. He's probably thinking closer to retirement over the next couple of years. And Salomonsson's one of the only guys in this prospect pool that I think has the horses to play with a guy like Morrissey. There's just not many guys in this pool that have the skating, the intelligence, the brain power, the transition ability, the passing. I mean, all the stuff that really is a very details-oriented, high-end, high-processing blue line sort of position. This is stuff that Salomonsson has, and I think tonight's game was a masterclass from him. He really didn't put a foot wrong, and it just showcases why I've been high on him for many years. I think he's very close to the NHL, or at least should be. Whether the Jets recognize that, I don't know. I think they are internally very high on him, and I'm pretty sure that he's been inquired about with respect to trade deadline stuff, and the answer was a flat no. I would agree with that assessment. I would say he's probably one of the guys that's untouchable in this pool. There are very few prospects that I would not trade, but Salomonsson is one of those guys. Yes, I always say that everyone technically has a price, and that's absolutely true. If somebody wanted to offer the world for Salomonsson, you're certainly willing to make that conversation happen. But that's, again, the sort of a haul that you just can't say no to. That's how good of a prospect I think Salomonsson is, and I think he's already a very good pro. It's time to start seeing him get some NHL reps. I hope that if there's maybe an injury this year, not that I'm hoping for injuries, but if inevitably stuff does happen, maybe Salomonsson deserves one of those first call-ups. If it happens and if you need somebody to step in, let Elias get some reps. He looks like he's ready for NHL duty already, and that's a lot to say for a young kid. But if this is where he's going and this is his trajectory, you all need to be on the hype train right now. Curious to know your thoughts about Salmon Man. How do you feel about Salomonsson's development? Are you as excited as I am? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that's going to be all the time that we have. Tomorrow, we'll talk a little bit ahead of preseason game number 2. I will have coverage of preseason game number 2 probably on Thursday. Wednesday, I'll be out of town, so just know that we might have a little bit of a delayed reaction, but you will hear it. You'll find some analysis throughout this week, and we are finally getting ready for the start of the season. So all hype. We're excited. We will see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night, and as always, go Jets, go.